deciding to attend my session. This is the value of e-billing, and what I'm going to be doing is focusing on first of all our contract service billing and collect debtor management modules. So this is where we sit into this e-billing area, but we're also going to have a look at the value of e-invoices as a whole and the benefits that we can actually achieve from that. So the professional advantage modules obviously fall into different categories, as you're all aware, and what we're looking at today is our billing and credit management area. So we see these as very much combined. Obviously you need to be able to produce invoices, and then you need to be able to deal with debt that may be generated from those invoices. And what we need to do is look at ways we can improve that and look at what's possible now and what's possible down the road and into the future, and why we need to be heading in that direction. So I think a good place to start is to think about what has been called the queen of business documents, the invoice. So it is known as the queen because it's the primary tool for understanding a transaction. It's the arbiter of the data that people have in that transaction, whether or not you're going to get paid, what detail is there around what you're purchasing or what you're selling. All of these things are very important, and they lead to a transaction occurring and revenue being generated by that when people pay you. So it's a witness to the transaction, and therefore we need to give it that respect. We need to work out the way to improve the speed at which that can be generated, and factors around how it's actually managed within your organisation, producing an invoice, but also within an organisation that may be receiving that invoice, and how that actually affects you and how they can pay that invoice. So we need to improve that. We need to look at ways of streamlining the processing. We need to look at how we can use digital technology, workflow capability, and most importantly data, going back to this morning's comment, in order to make that a better process for everybody. So why an e-invoice? Is it that we want overdue invoices? Do we want debt accruing? Do we want to be chasing that all the time, slowing down your revenue, etc.? Or do we want quick payment of invoices achieved almost automatically? Now, it would be lovely if we could say magically it would all just happen without any effort at all. There's always going to be effort, but if we can cut that effort out, we can actually make things quicker, we can make it better. And we're used to invoices being shuffled around, and that may actually involve sales approval as well. You may have workflow type processes in generating an invoice, but also when they arrive at someone's desk, the AP team, it may sit there, it needs to be stamped, understood, etc., etc. So the more we can improve on that and generate something that may have data in it that can be understood by your systems, by the machinery, rather than necessarily just being human compatible, the more we can improve the possibility of that being done quickly and efficiently and automatically. And that's why you need to move towards an e-invoice. And what that actually does is it gives you fast processing, because you can generate invoices quickly. You can also then have them received easily and understood by the systems that they're going to, and that in turn means you can be paid quicker, so therefore you have a lower DSO. It gives you higher revenue recognition, and it can reduce your costs because you're not having to post invoices, print them out, use manual people's actual actions and time and effort to do that. So there's a great cost benefit in moving that direction. So these benefits have a number of other factors. If we can make it a more data-rich and easily understood invoice. First of all, you have fast retrieval of money, so therefore people are paying you quicker. We have higher accuracy, and that depends on the systems generating the invoice as well. So we all understand that with SunSystems, you have capability for analysis control and all sorts of clever ways of actually defaulting data in and ensuring the right rules are adhered to when you do something. So using that, levering off it and ensuring that goes into your invoice and gets dispatched quickly and easily without having to do any recoding or anything like that is a good thing. It's quicker and cheaper, obviously, because postal costs are actually very high. And actually, how many people in the room currently do generate and post invoices manually? Yeah, actual post paper, that sort of thing? Okay. Right, okay.
So just working out how to bring this into
To do that.
It's actually a recipe of payments, so you're not they don't care how it comes really.
Fair enough. And then you've got sort of the ability to send an electronic copy of those things, which we'll come to as we go along. So definitely there's value in it. And we also can improve things such as storage costs. You don't want to have invoices having to be received and then kept. You want them to be imported and understood and kept within your system. Digital storage costs nothing nowadays. It really is so cheap. And the changes in terms of how people can actually retain invoices and the rules around what's allowed in terms of digital retention or paper retention and how long you have to keep them very much support the initiatives towards e-invoicing already. So these things are very important. And of course, you're also reducing people's time. People time is the most expensive thing we have in an organisation, and we want to optimise that wherever possible. That had actually pushed along by a growing swell of initiatives. So there is actually a number of different areas where it's almost becoming compulsory to start utilising e-invoices. And there are lots of benefits to it, and that's why it's happening. So we just take a few here. There are many, but I've taken a selection. So if we first of all look at the European Commission Directive 2014-55 EU, back in 2014 obviously, and this is their effort to actually attempt to look at standardisation of formats. So when you produce an invoice, you can have many different ways of laying out an invoice, putting data into it and understanding it. And unless we can start to standardise that, we don't have any hope of pushing towards a universally understood invoice and systems being easily interoperable on both the debtor side and on the generation side. So this is not dictating that you have to use a certain format. What it's doing is it's saying everybody should start considering how this can be done, national bodies should be starting to look at it, etc. Then we also have a number of subgroups. So if you take the European Multi-Stakeholder Forum of Electronic Invoicing, EMSFEI, what a mouthful that is, this is a body that's come about because of the directive, and it's a group of companies, organisations, supranational bodies, etc., all coming together to start considering how we can get the right format. And that's proved a bigger debate. Does anyone here on the payment side generate SEPA payments at all within Europe? Transfer money around within Europe? No? Okay. That would have been a good example. But so SEPA was a directive like this, and it was to do with making fast, automatic, easily understood payments universal in Europe, and ensuring people started to use the right format to transmit them so that could occur. So if you think of faster payments, everyone's now getting faster payments. This is the European side of that. So that's now fully implemented, it's optimised, and it's going forward. This is what the multi-stakeholder forum was about, coming up with these formats to start thinking about how we can do it. And then if you look at the benefits, if you look at this one here, an OECD report, they're saying that annually, benefits of 40 billion euro across Europe on business to business has been achieved on the basis of e-invoicing. So people automatically generating, receiving the data and managing it in that way. And there have been some early adopters as well. So if we look at Denmark, very, very early, 2005, they actually implemented this. They said that if you were dealing with a public sector body, you had to be receiving an e-invoice in a certain format, and you could not deal with them unless you started doing that. So they pushed that through, and they reckon it saved Danish taxpayers 150 million a year, and it saved businesses 50 million a year within Denmark alone. And Spain and Italy are very much on this path as well. They're already pushing this direction. In the UK, this is coming about, some things coming from the directive, but also if you deal with the public health sector, there are actually very strong pushes to saying you can't deal unless you work with our invoice format and they're able to generate things in the right way. So this is going to grow, is what I'm saying, and there are benefits to it. It's not that we're all being forced down this route, it's that there are benefits we should try and achieve from doing that. So if you think about the hurdles to it, there are a number of things that people need to start considering. First of all, education. So understanding that there is a reason to do it, and the challenges and how we can start going down this route. Things like this are good for starting that understanding. We need to deal with this wide range of formats. We need to start pinning down which ones we're going to be using, and this is becoming a bit clearer. I'll come back to that because at the moment we're working in the direction of a certain format. National rules, as I mentioned, on retention, on usage, things like that, need to support it. So if they're saying you can't have electronic storage for an invoice unless it's signed in a certain way, etc., that makes it hard, but it is getting there. System capability, flexibility, you need a system to do it. And then dealing with custom client requirements. And customers are painful sometimes, in that you say use a particular format, but they say, well, we need extra data. We need this extra bit on our invoice, or we need it in a certain way. And if you've got one or two of those, that's fine. But if you've got 45 of those, or you've got 145 of those, it starts adding up how much time and effort it is to deal with these customizations, and you move away from standard. So you almost start to need to talk to your customers and say, can we deal with this? Can you actually use invoices in this format? Can we generate it? Can you receive it? And starting to form relationships that actually help you move in the right direction and realize these savings as you're going forward. Security, important. Generating electronic data, sending it out. We have to comply with a number of different hurdles in that respect. And personal data, GPRS or whatever it's called, I can't remember from this morning, is actually a very key thing there too. And then of course fast emerging technologies. People are a bit scared of doing something because they could be out of date by the time they get there, particularly when you've got formats suddenly changing and they're becoming what you are. Do you implement something or do you wait before it's perfectly there? And then moving forward, there may be other things we don't know about. So the pace of technology has moved us in this direction. You've obviously all got digital counting systems, which is great. You know, you've got SunSystems, you've got your analysis, you've got the ability to generate things and send things out, etc. It's removing that process in creating an invoice. You then have your low accuracy, post-print, slow, costly manual invoice generation and dispatch. And we're now moving really to where we are now, which is an e-invoice. So an e-invoice is the ability to send an invoice in an electronic format that can be understood. It's speedy from your end, it can be received easily. But the problem is that they may not be data rich. So you may have a PDF document, as Neil mentioned this morning, that actually is human compatible and it's electronically received and understood and can be signed, etc. But you don't have a data-rich format which has the same qualities as a PDF format in that it's rapid delivery, its human interaction is easy to it, it's automated, etc. But it doesn't have the automated receiving of the data at the other end. So where you've got a customer, they want to be able to drop the invoice in, import the data, it's instantly in their account system, they can understand it, act upon it, and then get it paid so that you can benefit from that. So the data-rich format is where we're going. And I think what we're saying is most people are about here or here. What you need to do is be here in order to then benefit from this sort of thing going forward. And we in CSB currently produce PDF formats, which is what Neil mentioned this morning. But we're working on moving that to a data-rich format so that you're actually able to then generate this automated receipt of the invoice and move you towards a standard. But we also want to be flexible. We don't want to be in a position where we set you to a format and then down the road, 2 years from now, EU or someone defines a format we're going to use and then that's locked in. So we want to be able to be flexible and achieve that. But the point is you can benefit still at this level through the rapid delivery, the easy understanding, etc., etc. Future, where do we go? Alex mentioned blockchain. Everyone wants to talk about blockchain, but invoicing is an absolute blockchain area in that distributed ledgers, universal understanding of trust, so you know the entity is trustworthy, it's validated before you even receive it. You know, all of this stuff is great, but it's going to take a long time. People are still working on blockchain, so I wouldn't worry about the future, but we need to get from here to this first level to move it forward. So the journey, ease of use. You need a system that can generate things, be flexible, have the workflow to support the generation of the invoices, and that's CSB. Contract service billing can achieve this for you. It can give you the capability to easily raise invoices, push them out the door, audit them, have data accuracy, etc., coupled with some systems. So you're able to go to that point now. Format standardization. CSB, we can produce PDFs. We are looking very strongly at the Zugwert format. This is this PDF document that has data enriched in the background. It's coming out of Germany, it's gaining a lot of traction in Europe, and the benefit of that is that it allows you to have a human compatible format for those who don't receive data electronically, but at the same time anyone who does can actually just use the same document, so you don't have to have two different things in the background. So that may be the way we go, but there is also a number of other formats there. There's the message user guides, there's the cross-industry invoice, these two here, and then your standard XML, CXML. But they would need certain things defined in them to achieve that. So there are options. You need to have client engagement. Can you invoice me electronically? What is my standard? What is your standard? Start thinking about these things and talking to them. And what's the cost saving to you if you do this? So most people, has anyone any idea how much it costs them to send an invoice and deal with it? This is it. If you look at the cost savings, you then may realise that there are ways of improving that. And if you think about the whole cycle, moving all the way across from the invoicing side, your data, through to managing the debt in Collect or whatever else you may use, that whole cycle it has a cost associated to it. And the more we can automate it, the more we can push it into being robotic, the better we're going to be off. And it's worth looking at the costs you may imply in doing that. So, the benefits of CSB and Collect at the moment. I'm going to try and show you both products. We'll see how much time we've got. Can I just check who in the room already has CSB? Okay, anyone that has Collect? Okay, so that's an interesting pairing. Both people who have CSB have Collect as well. And there is a balance there in the way that they work. There's also some good integration between the two that we can talk about. So if you look on this side, CSB, it gives you all the automated dispatch, removal of paper, reducing the workload. It's very much SunSystems integrated. It posts invoice data directly to the ledger, and it gives you a new interface which is designed purely for invoice entry. So you don't need to use Sun Sales Invoicing for this. You don't have to have any of that underlying SunSystems functionality. If you just have the ledger in Sun, probably most of you have more than that, but if you did, CSB can be deployed separately to anyone who raises invoices, deals with both recurring and ad hoc invoices, and use that interface to create, manage, generate, and push out all the invoices. In the background, it can then just push all the invoice data into SunSystems off the back of it. And it utilizes all of the SunSystems validation, analysis codes, account data information, etc., that already exists in there. So that's... Can it produce? It can, at the moment, and this is where I feel, I wish I could go a bit further. At the moment, it produces a PDF electronic document that is dispatched directly to the customer by email.
But just what about, saying, just I'm thinking like a housing system, we have a tenant ledger side, which is really appalling, and it'd be quite good to be able to produce those invoices in a better system. But we would need to start to get that back information back in. Right.
Okay. So, so not the client invoice side, but you internally into your other system.
Yeah.
So, CSB can import invoices from another system. So quite often we find clients actually take it on to act as the invoicing engine for some other area. So in your situation, you could generate all the liabilities, the detail that you needed in your specialist system for that. Push the data into CSB via an XML feed. We actually have an XML service that sits there and picks up data and brings it in. That could then generate invoices in CSB, which could go through an approval path. Once they're ready, get sent out and generated for the actual client. And then what we do to write it back is we've written a number of little write-back functions that depend upon the system that's needed. So we do have the ability to write a service that will write back the fact an invoice has been sent or the final invoice number or whatever's needed back into those systems. The housing systems are one that we've covered a number of times, so that's certainly something we can look at. Going forward, we'll add to that write-back service the ability to produce the electronic invoice for the true e-invoice with the data-rich environment. Does that answer the question? Cool. So on the other side, you need to be able to understand your debt. You need to have an efficient system for managing people's interactions with those customers. You need reminders. You need to generate statements, letters off the back of the data, analyze it effectively, and that's where Collect comes in. And the two are integrated, so from within Collect, you can drill into your invoice and have a look at that data, etc. And it will be a wonderful world if you all had electronic invoice generation and data management, and your customers all had the ability to import data and push this thing through their system as well, because that's where the benefit comes through the robotic processing. So, we're going to have a look at contract service billing. For those of you who already have it, apologies if you know how this all works, but I may say something wrong. Please do correct me. And the benefits, basically, this is just a comment from one client, but the point is it is a good, solid electronic system for doing this, and there are cost savings as well, just as an aside, in relation to doing this through CSB from a maintenance and licensing point of view over having to implement a full SunSystems sales invoicing system to achieve that. So there's some benefits there as well. So I'll just escape from here. And we're going to go and have a look at CSB. So I've actually logged in to CSB here through our ActiveX portal. Now I don't know if any of you have implemented systems using our ActiveX web portal at all? No? Anyone here use ActiveX? So we're actually moving all of our products to be fully web-based. So those of you who use IPOS, obviously fully web-based. B4B, which is our payment system, is now fully web-based. So CSB and a number of others still are not fully web-based, but they're accessible through our web portal. So we have an ActiveX portal where we can deploy our different products through basically a link. and then you can use this without being on the domain, without being on the network, that sort of thing. So it gives you the same environment, but through ActiveX. You do need to download a little ActiveX app to do that. However, it gives you the same environment, and you can still deploy it locally. The other thing here, of course, is cloud, in that everybody's looking at potentially moving to the cloud down the road. This is sort of going to be a slow process, I think. SunSystems, obviously, you can get it in a cloud-based environment, you can get a fully hosted environment, or locally hosted for yourselves. We need to cover all of these things, so the web deployment actually works well from a cloud point of view. So if we have a look at, sorry, just a quick time check. Thanks. So if we have a look at CSB, this is the standard CSB interface that we log into, and it's designed to just give you quick and easy visibility of invoices and the ability to raise invoices in various different forms. So when we first log in, you'll see along the top here we have invoices, approvals and contracts. The difference between invoices and contracts is to do with recurring capability. So you may have a situation where you need to raise an ad hoc invoice, which is something just a one-off, send it, dispatch it, done. Or you may have a recurring requirement. So something that recurs monthly, weekly, annually, it needs to be billed on a regular basis, and you don't want to be filling in that and sending the invoice every time. We can handle both of those concepts within CSB. So this means it's a combined module and there's no extra cost involved in actually having the recurring billing functionality, if that's of interest to you. When you first log in, down the bottom here, you can see the business unit you're in SunSystems, you've got the user ID, and you can obviously jump and configure between different business units. So if you've got multiple business units, you can decide what you're going to do with them and configure them all separately. If we consider the tree, on the left-hand side, we have what we call our invoice tree. So invoices moving through the system go through various steps and stages. So when you first produce an invoice, it typically goes in as a held invoice. So this means that it's started, you've saved it, it's not going anywhere. You may want to come in and edit it. You then perhaps later would want to release it on through the process. So you can actually batch invoices up. If I look in held, underneath the held function, we have various different invoice types. And each of these would have invoices that are created and sitting there at that level. So they're all held invoices with an ID associated to them. So you may want to create an invoice, release it, dispatch. Or you may want to enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 50 in a day, and then later do a batch release to move them all forward in one go. So it covers that both real-time or batch type processing. And each of these invoice types are entirely configurable by you. So we can decide what invoice types you need. They could have different documents associated to them. They can have different analysis structures, different calculation fields and condition codes. All of that is entirely configurable. And we do have quite a powerful filtering and configuration engine there, where we can build formulas that are not just based on numeric data. We can actually build in condition codes, where by putting in certain text or use certain fields, certain things, it may drive the calculations in a different way. So we can be relatively flexible. Most people are going to have at least a couple of invoice types and a credit note type, but you may have many, depending on what you need in the organization. So if I then go down through the held process, when we release a held invoice, it typically would end up in the released stage. So this is where it's ready to go. It's ready to post and it's ready to send out to SunSystems. And then finally, when you release invoices, they could end up as posted invoices down in Sun, generated, and the invoice is dispatched. So invoices are actually dispatched into to the client by a PDF electronic document, or printed out if you wanted to. Let's hope we don't go there. On a real-time basis. And you'll notice that invoices at this stage have a true invoice number. So the invoice number is assigned to it at the point of dispatch and the point that the data is pushed into SunSystems. Up here at the top, if we're looking at a held invoice or a rejected invoice or something like that, they have an ID number. So that's just an internal identifier. It's not the actual invoice number that gets assigned. We can have different number streams. We can have that at the business unit level, we can have global, or down at the invoice type, or indeed even the user group level, if that's what we wanted. So we can control all of that. The grid in the middle is designed to be dynamic. So this is all my invoices. If I look at just released, then it will show me just released. If I look at posted, it will show me posted, or a particular invoice type, etc. So it will dynamically show me the history of my invoicing that I've been going through over time. And you'll see that in the grid, we have a status. So you can see that it's a posted invoice, or maybe it's a released invoice, etc. But the grid is quite flexible. We try and show as much information as we can on the grid, and you'll see that it's got the main sort of data fields, so invoice types, IDs, numbers, descriptions, dates. Moving across, we've got user IDs, etc., etc. And we can, like any PA product, drag this grid around. So if you prefer to have things in a certain order, or maybe you would like to have it grouped by invoice type, we can go and have a look at everything by invoice type, or maybe by status. So invoice type by status. If we have a look at this one, we have only released, whereas if we look at this one, okay, they're all released, but you get the point. So this grid allows you to easily start to understand that data structure. And additionally, we can filter. So you could actually start to say, show me everything in this column, bits of this column, or indeed build a custom filter where you could say, I need things that equal, less than, greater than, and we can add an and or an or function to do more than one filter on each column. So you can build out quite a lot of filters there. You also have some wildcards you can use, and it keeps a filter for you in the screen. So if I add a filter here, down the bottom I've put something in that obviously doesn't show any data, but down here you can see we've got description like one. That is a filter that is kept, and you can turn it on or off, and you can add as many of those as you like. So within your session, if you start to filter, you may be jumping between data and want to have a look at things, you can build all of these, leave them there, and then at a later point you can come in and remove the filter entirely if you wanted to. That is within the session. So when you log back out, log back in again, you would lose those filters in there. But it's a very sort of useful functionality. You can also drill, obviously, directly into an invoice from here and have a look at it. And if I do that, it will open up the invoice screen, the actual data. But I'll come back to that in a second when we get to that point. So if I wanted to raise an invoice, we want this to be simple. We could be importing it. So we could drop an XML file in from another system. It would import it, create a load of held or released invoices, depending on what you need. For me, I'm going to just create an ad hoc invoice. So at the top of the screen, I can go new, and this gives me an invoice screen which has some header data, and we can decide what goes in this header area. So we have an invoice ID, or become a number, a reference, etc. But we may also start to put certain analysis dimensions on the top there. So if you want department codes, project codes, things like that at the top, we can do that. We can also have references. So lots of different additional references could be added in here if you needed to. The first thing we want to do is to choose the invoice type. So I'm going to have a look at the types I have here and just use this simple sales invoice. So it's an easy type to use. We can define for an invoice a multi-currency function. So invoices in CSB can be fully multi-currency. We support the currency conversion rates, etc. from SunSystems, both period and daily. And we can define which invoice types are using a certain currency or have it as an open type currency. Does anyone in the room use multi-currency at all? Yeah, okay, one, cool. It's interesting, sometimes you have a room and everybody's multi-currency, sometimes not. We can choose a customer. So this is a direct drill into the debtors in SunSystems. So you do have to have a debtor code set up within Sun to generate it, but it could be a client account as well. So we can do client and we can set creditors as well, actually. Some people use it in a clever way for reverse billing, which I think you've looked at. But the point is you can have typically debtor accounts. And when we choose a debtor, what that will do is it will bring through some information from Sun. So this is where we go back to our accuracy, easy access. We don't have to fill things in. It's immediately there for us. We have the address code, and if there were more than one address code for this customer, then it would appear in this list and we could change that. We have the client default contact, and again, if there were more than one contact set up in Sun, we could see it. And moving across on the header, we could have a different delivery address. Sometimes you need a different address. We can have defaulting of our dimensions. So each invoice type, depending on the business unit, can have certain dimensions that may be required, not required, defaulted, etc. Maybe we default these based on the invoice type, maybe on the business unit, maybe on the user that's logging in. So you may want to always record an employee code or a department code or something like this. And then we have an additional 10 references that we can use on the header. Yes.
Sorry. Just going back to the transaction analysis before you go too far from there. Can you pick up any or link any of those directly to the customer record?
You can. If in Sun you've used the dimensions to actually say that one of your dimensions is related to the customer record, then you could have one appearing here that could be directly linked.
And is it just one or multiple? Because it's one of the things that we're looking at right now.
Okay. It could be multiple, but it would depend on how you configured the dimensions in Sun for use here, and then we can have up to 10 all of the analysis dimensions from Sun.
Can you have, because I'm thinking from our point of view, we would probably bring in the address and whatever from the other database and just put it, for some purposes, just put it to an income code. So like, ground rent invoices, for example, So could you have...
Bringing the address in as part of the invoice data sort of thing. So...
Because you wouldn't necessarily need that, you don't necessarily need that in Sun, because you already got it in your...
And would it be, would the debtor code already exist in Sun?
No.
No.
We don't have a debtors in
So
Sun.
it all goes to a debtor clearance?
Yeah, we've got debtor control account, but then the income goes to ground rent.
Certainly you could deal with the debtor control account side of it, that wouldn't be an issue. Bringing the address detail in, that's an interesting question. Shiv,
well, I was thinking, wouldn't it be the reverse of doing sundry suppliers? So you could have you'd have to have a default address linked to your creditor.
Yes, you would have a default, but then you use the different fields to represent the address. So that's exactly what I say. So what I would say is you probably end up using additional reference fields to be your address. So you would actually define in this invoice type the actual fields that you would be populating with the address detail, and that's where you would have it rather than having it coming from an address record in Sun. The perfect scenario would be to have address records created in Sun separately so that it linked up.
With housing management solutions, when you've got, I don't know how many you've got, but if we've got, say, as I said, 110,000 residents.
It's a lot to bring in.
Yeah, you're not looking at setting those up. So, and you then get the security issues around managing those address fields and what have you. So I get exactly where you're coming from. You want one, like I said, a bit like a sundry supplier record, a sundry creditor record, so it can just flow, and then you can, as you say, put the addresses into different fields.
I think there are a number of ways that we could think about how to achieve that, but I'd probably have a think and take it offline to come up. But certainly we could find a way to deal with it, I'm sure. So these references you can use for anything you like. You can find them in the background. I've only got 3, but you can have up to 10 there. You've also got the ability to add notes. So internally, you may want to, as part of your approval process, just add some notes to this. And that then is kept as part of the audit trail. They don't go on to the invoice. They're just part of your reporting inside. And we can add attachments. Quite commonly, you want to send out a backing sheet with an invoice. So you want to send the invoice, but you may also want to send a schedule or some other information about why you're billing them that. So if you attach something here, it will be included in the dispatch document. So when you send out that email with the invoice on it, it will include those extra documents. And then finally, revenue recognition is an interesting one. It's the accrual of sales invoicing. So you may decide that for certain invoice types and certain item types, you want to recognise revenue at certain points in the year, certain points in the period. So maybe you're billing them now, but you're going to get the revenue at quarterly staged payments, that sort of thing. So we can actually create an invoice type, an invoice item type that allows it to understand what that breakdown would be for that item. And then when the invoice is produced, we then run a revenue recognition function in here, which will break it all down and show you where that revenue will be coming in and move it from a revenue recognition account into the actual ledger at the point at which you want that to occur. So that's something we can handle.
Sorry, just on that. So would that be the same, would that be a different account in the actuals ledger, or would that be an account in...
It's a different account in the actual ledger typically. You're just having it in a revenue recognition account and then shifting it off.
As opposed to on the purchasing side where you'd have commitments in a separate
ledger. No, we don't use another ledger. I guess you could, but most people just have it.
I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Okay, cool. So now we've got the header, we need some items. We can do this in a detailed grid, or we can have it in a grid across. People depend on what they want to do. For ease of demo, I tend to find this is simpler to show. So we can choose an item code. Items are entirely up to you. You can have detail items, granular items. Items can be associated to a price book where you can have costs associated, discounts applied if you choose a certain quantity. All of these sort of things can be set up within there. I'm just going to use one called a one-off invoice, but it could be anything you like. As a matter of interest, we use CSB for our maintenance billing. So the invoices you receive on maintenance from PA are generated by CSB. So that then defaults your revenue account. We can have other accounts as well associated to an item. So it may be that in certain cases you need discount accounts and things like this. That's all definable as to what will appear here when you go into an invoice. You've then got quantity, you have an amount. In this case, I've defaulted the amount to be 600, but it could be something you want to type in. This description is a description that typically we push into Sun because it's a 50-character limit, and Sun has a description limit of 50 characters. So we give you this so that you could have either a default or make sure it's the right length. And then the bigger description here can be used as much as you like to produce reams of description, and you can put both or either on the actual invoice document when it goes out the door. These are things that need to be considered in e-invoicing, because we need to think about what that format will accept, what the other systems are going to accept. All of these things need to be defined in relation to the format. Down here, calculations, very simple calculations in this case, but we could have up to 10 different calculations that you can apply on an invoice if that's required. And then going across, we can add T-codes or, going back to some 4 or 5 days, dimension analysis. I've been in Sun for 23 years now, so it's a bit of a time. But the point is you can have dimensions at each level, and again, up to 10 references at the line level that we can use. So you could use this for all sorts of extra bits of information, such as PO numbers, etc., etc. In Deanne's session, which unfortunately right now you're missing, but I think there's a repeat of that, she's talking about the back-to-back billing function. So we're actually working at the moment for procurement around CSB and IPOS being linked together for back-to-back billing purposes, whereby if you are actually selling something, you may need to buy it. So there's actually a reason to generate a purchase order at the point at which you create an invoice. So there's actually going to be a new function in here that allows us to link these references and hold a requisition in IPOS until the sale is approved and sent out. Once that's then approved, it will generate the purchase order and link the reference back into here. So it's bringing all of these things together. Again, it's digital control. That's okay.
Is that only within one business unit? Because I'm just suddenly thinking, could we use that for intercompany billing purposes?
So CSB is streamed by business unit.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking if we raise the sales invoicing, so I'll take our repairs company, it only works for Peabody. So it produces sales invoices that it sends to Peabody, and then we process them as in IPOS as purchase invoices in a separate business unit. So is this...
So the IPOS to CSB integration will be cross business unit, because it will be utilising an XML feed to achieve it. So we could actually map what needs to be done using the intercompany accounts.
So that could massively slick up our intercompany.
Okay, you and Deanne probably need to put your heads together. I'm sorry. So now I've added all these details. What I'm going to do is save the invoice. So when I save the invoice, this then pushes it to be a held invoice with an ID, 356. I could have added as many lines as I wanted at this stage. I could also have had that go from held automatically to released. I don't have to have the held stage if we don't want to. I can then either right-click on here and say release, which will move it on through the next step, or I could keep batching them up and later go and do a batch release. So at the top here, I could go release a number of them and do a whole lot in one go, if that was relevant. From here, I can copy an invoice at any stage. If I wanted to create a new invoice the same as one I've already done, I can just copy it, it creates it. I can roll it back, so if it was forward through to the next stage, I can always bring it backwards through the tree. And I can go and print it, obviously. So you could actually print a pro forma invoice at this stage if you wanted to have something to distribute to people where this is the invoice I will bill you, do you approve it? I will now send it, we can do that. But I'm just going to release it, which will move it to the next step, just based on time. There's a number of things we can do there. It's now at the release stage, and finally, if I had decided to do this as a batch or as an individual invoice, post, that then gives me the journal number in Sun. Posted through a ledger interface immediately. There's no file, it's just like all PA products directly into Sun. And my invoice number is now applied, the journal number is given to it, and you know that that invoice has been dispatched at the same time. So it's actually sent the PDF currently to be the rich data document going forward out the door at that stage. You can see it's posted. So if I wanted to see the invoice document, because I haven't got a printer, I'll probably just do it from within here. If I go print invoices, there's a selection where I can fill in what I'm trying to find. Gives me all of the invoices that are relevant to that selection, and I can do this for releasing as well and posting batch. Here, I can then go and preview, and it would then open up the invoice document as the report designer has been defined for this particular invoice type or for the business unit, etc. So there is actually a report designer within here. Oh, that's good. There is actually a report designer within here which allows you to define your own documents, similar to any invoice that you may have within, any product. Sorry? Okay, that was working yesterday.
I've got a quick question.
Yes, please do ask a question while I try and...
Invoice
yeah.
manual. We're a publishing company, so this would be brilliant for us, but can you raise credit notes associated to a manual invoice? So you pull up the invoice and go, no, I want credit now.
Yes.
And it reverses it back out.
Yeah, so you could actually have a credit note type which is associated to an invoice and then reverse and create a credit note from within here, as long as the invoice has been created from within CSP. So you'd have to feed data from wherever you generate those things and have CSP as your invoicing engine to achieve that. Particularly relevant for recurring billing. So if you're doing many invoices over and over and over, it's linked to the recurring billing and knows what it's done. So it can reverse them, it can do adjustments, things like, yeah, exactly. So that, 15 minutes, thank you. So as to why I can't see that, I know why I can't see it, but I haven't got time to fix it. So apologies, I'm not sure why it wasn't working today when it was yesterday. But it would produce an invoice which is actually related to the...
And when you say it's sent out the door, what do you mean by that?
So currently...
Email attached
Okay.
to that supplier?
So currently what it would do is it will automatically email an attached PDF document plus any other attachments to the supplier based on the email address held in the debtor record or in the address that you have. You also can use the distribute function, which allows you to actually send it manually to other people if you wanted to. So you can actually define... Correct. Yeah, exactly what it does. And down the road, you have the XML function or the other data functions as well. You can obviously preview and save it off to a file if you needed to. So very much, apologies I can't show you the invoice currently. I'm not sure why that's the case. What I want to show you, if I can get this to close. Total failure of Stout Party. If in doubt, log in again. So in here, we also have our contract function. So the contract is actually where we can do our recurring billing. So you can have as many contracts per company as you wish. Under a contract, the main difference is that we have an invoicing frequency defined. So this means that as a batch, once a month I can generate contract invoices, depending on the frequencies defined or maybe the selection of partners or customers, etc. And it will then generate the required billing based on the frequency. It will produce the right values, it will work out when it last billed, if it needs to do it again, or maybe you've already done it for the month and won't do it, etc. When you get to the end of the year, if you run an adjustment, change values, it will actually work out if there's any changes that need to be made, if you've overbilled, underbilled, all of that sort of stuff. So in housing, it's very popular for that sort of thing. We have a number of clients with case studies using it in that sector. And we can also, as part of this, set up changes to values at certain points in the year, all that sort of thing as well. So I can go into this in more detail. If anyone's interested, please do come and see us and we can talk about it. But that's basically CSP, and I think where we're going with this, as I say, is that we're adding the e-Invoice rich data functionality, and that's where we're going to have these formats coming about. So with a very little amount of time left, we'll jump onto collect quickly. So collect is the other end of the equation to CSP. It's how you manage that debt. And does anyone here manage debtors? Do you have a debtor process? Some companies don't really have debtors. Yep. A few? No? Okay. So people who don't tend to have very automated processes. The invoicing is pre-arranged billing, that sort of thing. Whereas if you do have debt, you need to have an effective way of managing that and understanding the communications with your customer. Collect is the standard SunSystems functionality to allow you to achieve this within the SunSystems environment. So first of all, we need to have the ability to see actions. So things that are sitting with me as a user in my to-do list that I may need to go and look at. So this is where I've been entering notes and reminders or systems-generated notes to say, please chase this customer about things. But let's start with Workbench. If we go into our Workbench, what we have is the ability to actually inquire on the current situation for a customer. So if we look at the Workbench, I now understand why my thing wasn't working. It was because it had a hidden screen saying I needed to say OK to the Jet Journal in the background. Apologies. So here, if I look at the Workbench and actually look at this particular debtor in Sun, what it will do is it will give us a bit of information about this customer. So first of all, we can actually have a look at aging. So this will give us a breakdown of the current and existing invoices in Sun based on various aging bands, and we can define these aging bands depending on what you require in your organisation. It could be 30, 60, 90 or something else. So this is the debt currently for today based on these aging bands. We can break down by currency, etc. We can also decide to do it by different days. So if I wanted to see what the debt would be next week, I can change the band and it will recalculate for me. Over here we have a graphical representation. Some people use it, some people don't, but we can use different types of analytics. And this is where Neil's comments this morning. We're looking at actually having machine learning capability in the background that will start to give you, for particular customers, a different idea of when they're likely to pay than purely based on aging. So it can start to apply weighted function to say maybe this one takes longer, this one takes less, generate reminders earlier, things like this. You've also got the ability to drill. So if I wanted to look at this 60 or 90-day aging band, double click, it will draw me into the transactions and I can see the actual invoices in Sun with all the detail. From the invoice itself here, we can do things such as allocate it. So if you wanted to actually allocate this against a payment, you could go in and say allocate. This would then show you a split screen where you can pick the payment data from within the account and allocate it by moving up to the top, and that will put the right R markers and everything else and A markers into Sun to allocate them off for you, so you don't have to jump into Sun to achieve this. We've also got the ability to do things such as payment plans. So maybe with this transaction, you come to an agreement that you want to, they're going to pay you 3 weekly, 4 weekly, something like that. So you could actually go and use the allocation function to use the split function to actually build those payment plans up effectively. So I pressed the wrong button, this one. So we could actually say, let's have 4 splits or 5 splits. We're going to say the weekly payments, and then if we do an equal empty split, it will actually then tell you what that would be weekly for 4 weeks and push that back into Sun. So you can actually spread the invoice over a number of weeks, things like this. Some organisations never do that sort of thing, but some do. In the background, we need to be able to create notes against this. So what's interesting is you can add a note. So if I go new note, this is say where I've got a communication with someone. I'm talking to Rodian about this. That's the client customer contact. We've got an action code. These are defined, so you can build as many action codes as you need to support your cycle. So I make calls, I do emails, I send reminders, whatever that may be. We build out our action code list. I'm going to, in this case, just say that I sent an email. I then can decide whether or not I want an action date. So remind me tomorrow that I'm going to do something off the back of this. They've promised to pay me potentially today, so I can start to record promise to pays against failed promises, things like this. And here I can start to put as much as I like into the text to say I talked to them, they said they pay me tomorrow, etc., etc. Once I'm done, I can save the note, and that then gets put into my notes list against this customer, and it will color code them based on the action type that you're using. And you can start to, with the grid, do exactly as you would normally do. We can filter, we can group, we can do other bits and pieces there. So this is a history of the actions and future actions that I'm going to take against the customer. And where I've put an action date, that will then translate into my to-do list. So if I look at actions by date, tomorrow I've now got 1 send email. I would have 2, 3, however many where. So when I come in tomorrow, first thing I do, land in here, have a look, open it up, and it shows me a list of the actions that I've now actually got to do. And we can have these sent as reminders. We can also go and drill in, add more detail, or create more notes off the back of it if we wanted to. You additionally can attach transactions. So if you're talking about a certain invoice, we can actually go in, find the invoice data that's relevant, so maybe that one, move it up to the top here, have a look at the detail of the transaction. Yes, that's the one I'm interested in. And then when I attach that to the note, it will then say this journal is permanently associated to the note, and in the body of the note, it can actually embed a summary of that transaction as well, if you wanted to. It's up to you. So you can have account level or transactional level notes. So that's sort of key. I'm very short on time, unfortunately, apologies. You can generate statements from here. So if I wanted to create a statement for this account, I can immediately go and choose what data I want on the statement, choose the format of the statement, and email it directly to the customer. Or indeed, I can do that sort of thing as a batch process. So we have a function within here called search sets. So search sets allow you to build out a set of data that could be for a process such as sending reminder letters, or it could be for just showing me the 30-day due or the 90-day due. So if I go and run 60-day letter or maybe 90-day letters, that's a predefined search set that I've set up, but I could do an ad hoc one. Doing well. Let me try 60-day due. Okay, I'm not going to try that again. But the point is, what it would do is it would generate a batch of data that would look somewhat like this. So it gives me a list of all the accounts that meet that criteria. And then from there, I could decide to maybe drill in, create notes, chase them, generate statements or whatever. So this could be an action list, or it could be a process. And the process, such as sending a letter, can generate a note. So when I look at the note listing, some of these could be statement sent or letter sent. And that could be timed to occur at 2 in the morning. And it could do all of your debtors. And it could do level 1 letters, level 2 letters, level 3 letters, when they're due, that sort of thing. So it can fully automate that account management statement generation type process within here. Finally, we have the ability to see some statistics around an account, when they last paid, how long they average days to pay, all of that sort of thing. So that gives you information at your fingertips in terms of what you're going to say to them. And if you wish to, you could also start to fill in more details around the contact, who you talk to, all of that sort of information. We have some reporting, so we can generate age debtor reports, statement reports, all of this sort of thing. I like the trend analysis report myself. It's recovery analysis. So this actually gives you a good breakdown for a customer, the name, the contact, how many days to say, payment terms, amounts due, all of it, and the notes, etc. So all of this is good for account analysis in the background. So I've run out of time. 5 minutes ago. Ooh, I've still got time. Cool. So the point is that if we look at or using collect, it can generate. It means that you can actually get your payments in faster because you're actually managing your debtor process. If you use CSB, you're able to generate invoices faster, easily, repeatable, and obviously recurring as well. So all of these things add up to give you a much more efficient process and generally move you towards reducing cost, increasing speed, and more money in the bank. That's ultimately what it's all about. So they're a good combination together. One point I will make is that you can drill from collect to CSB. So if you're looking at a transaction list, I don't know if I've got one actually set up in here. But down here, you see we have this external systems function. You can actually set up a link to contract service billing. So if you are generating invoices in CSB, you can then go and click here and drill back into the invoice data from CSB. So if you've got another system, currently you'd find it very hard to drill from SunSystems information into your housing system or your publishing system, whatever. If you generate invoices through CSB, immediately you've got a debt to invoice type connection that you can benefit from, which is quite neat. You can also build drill downs, which are very relevant to people who actually have other systems. So if I look at this bank details drill down, this is where we can define using code. Looks complex, don't worry about what it actually says, but the point is if you've got another system and you've got a commonality of referencing, so say you've got one unique reference that's coming from the other system into here, we can build a linkage that allows you to drill back into the other system through the database and bring back data around that from the other system as well, so that you can see that in the same position. So that's sort of custom, but the point is it supports that custom type functionality. So that really, I think, concludes what I was going to say. Obviously, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. I hope that it was useful. Is there any further questions that anyone would like to ask at this stage?
Two very, very quick ones, hopefully for you. Can you, in CSB, see that an invoice has been paid in the same way that you can with iPOS?
You can. So once it's allocated in Sun or in Collect, depending, you then at the top of the invoice marker can see the payment indicator.
And you don't shrink the screen like you have the current version of iPOS. Change the labels.
I'm unaware of that. In CSB, I haven't encountered that, and I shouldn't.
But in the upgrade, they put all the things back to the full length, which means you can't see the allocation marker without shrinking the screen.
Okay. Afterwards, maybe we can go and have a chat with Deanne.
6.1.14.
I'll check that one. And then the other one was, one of the requirements I've been given is the ability to see sales invoices. So we'll have a management accountant looking at the numbers in Sun and go, what's that invoice? I want to see a picture of that invoice. So as I mentioned earlier on with iPOS, we've got a scanned document going through. How would we facilitate that if we were doing the sales invoicing via CSB?
So the standard answer would be that you would run inquiries on those invoices within CSB, and then you could see the document from within there by looking at the invoice. So you'd use the search function, the find function to find it, and you could see it. If you wanted the document held in your DMS system, you would need to build some form of DMS linkage into the actual invoice referencing.
In the file, in the icons, you add it in the transaction references to being common.
Common field, yeah. So you could use an invoice reference field in here and define that as a DMS link. What we need to look at is how we actually write that link back. So there will be a number of methodologies on that.
That's fine, but we'll just add that to the statement.
Cool. So yes, you could have a link somewhere. or you could just look at it in SunSpeak, because it is its own repository.
But I can just see it's a bit of a retrograde step to say you can see the IPOS invoices from a drill from Sun, but you couldn't see the CSB ones. You'd have to step out and go, you know, I can see people going, why?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It would be best to have a reference link in there in some way, and we just need to work on what that is. And off the top of my head, I wouldn't give a decisive answer.
No, that's fine.
Need to have a look at it. But it's actually a really good idea for standard functionality, because we are looking at this back-to-back function. So if we're doing that, we will have a natural linkage anyway, so therefore we may well be able to do something there. So, any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your time. And lunch, am I right in thinking it's lunch? Yes, lunch in the other room. Thank you.